Okay, this is a logistics video. It's going to be on gear to stockpile to hand out. When does this come into play? There is a little thing that is done in the Michigan Militia, that's who I heard about it from, called a 5-10 program. Each militiaman or Minuteman or community defense person, whatever, after they get their required gear, they're expected to get enough gear, weapons, and supplies to supply 5 or 10 additional people. Well, 5 or 10? 5 people is an additional fire team, 10 people is an additional squad. And from what I heard, there's no real time limit on this. It's just, you need to make progress every so often. So, I got it here, a list of items, kind of prioritized of what I think you should look for getting a hold of because of, first off, the 2 items on here, items that I typically see missing from even militia who think they're fully prepared, they have everything and they're ready to go. And then, items that you can pass out also to someone who needs it. Well, who would be someone that would need this stuff? If you are in a prepping or survivalist situation, it could be family member or friends who arrive at the survival retreat at your homestead. They don't have anything with them for whatever reason. They had to leave it behind because they were escaping, evading on foot. They lost it all in their vehicle. Maybe they started getting ready right before the collapse or whatever happened. Okay, and they don't have everything that they need. They show up at your site, at your homestead, at your retreat, at the survival community. They need a basic amount of stuff so that they can still operate as part of the defense element. The next scenario is a resistance unit, a guerrilla unit, a militia unit. You have your initial element that you start the conflict with. Maybe not everyone has been able to buy what they're supposed to have, their required items. Well, that's where you have spare items you can give to them to fill out those missing items. It could also be you have people that you freed. They were prisoners. They could have been militia and other units, or just people who've now made the decision that, hey, I was arrested, I was being abused, I'm going to fight back. Okay, here's a set of gear for you to be able to do it. And if it's in a resistance situation, also keep in mind, I did a video on this and people were real butthurt about it. Priorities of who should get what after the ambush, after the operation. The priority is always going to be making sure that everyone has everything that's considered a minimum before people go through and start taking souvenirs. People got seriously butthurt over that one in that video. So let's jump in now. First, I'm going to tell you, have a unit standard or a group standard. There are tons of videos and packing lists out there of what's considered the minimum you should have for different countries, different wars, different eras, different types of operations. Like everyone's trying to come up with their super Navy SEAL recon loadout bullshit, which, those of us who served in the military laugh at. Because it doesn't really work that way in real life outside Special Forces. And guess what? You're not Special Forces. You're more than likely going to be just a grunt, an infantryman. So equip yourself accordingly. Now, I will put some things linked in the description and as a pinned comment. First off, I'm going to put in there PM 8-94, how to start and train a militia unit. This is, I believe, from the Michigan Militia from 30 years ago. Well, guess what? There is a recommended gear list in there. It's something you can go off of. And if you are starting a group, hey, maybe it'll give you some tips on doing that too. Another thing that I'm going to have in there is a article, or no, it's a poster that was from an article from Military Times. It's going to be a list of authorized eye protection for the U.S. military. This list is from 2015. There was an earlier list that was published in, say, 2004, 2005, but I can't find it. The eye protection that is listed in there is stuff that is rated to protect against high-speed fragments from IEDs. It's not going to protect you from that large chunk of metal that can cut your arm off, but it can protect you from those really small shards that could burst your eyeball. So if you're looking for eye protection, what's authorized, what will protect you, look at that list, see what the standards are in there according to the U.S. military. It'll have in there the listings for OSHA and that stuff, I believe. Go off of that and then look in the market. Now, first item that I usually see missing is mess gear. I did a video on this, on what should be the minimum gear, but for spare items to pass out, you really should have, as a complete set to pass out to a person, some type of mess kit, some type of metal cup. It can be a canteen cup or a civilian metal cup that you can put over fire to heat up some water inside. A set of utensils, at a minimum, fork and spoon, and canteens or camelbacks with the capacity of minimum 2 quarts. Next up, a full-size rucksack, and I'm going to throw in there an entrenching tool with carrier that can be attached to the rucksack. Everybody has an assault pack. Everybody has a day pack, and they think that's good enough. If you're going to be in a resistance situation, especially operating out in nature, you're going to want a full-size ruck. Well, what counts as full-size ruck? Think of, for capacity-wise, a U.S. military medium Alice pack. And make sure that you have straps, and if that pack has to have a frame like the U.S. large Alice pack, make sure you have a frame that is complete. It has the kidney pad and all that stuff with it so that a person can use it without getting themselves hurt. There are tons of backpacks out there on the market that are military surplus and civilian that almost look military. That will work, that will fulfill this requirement. Below that, gears that someone could be missing for one reason or another. First priority on that, load-bearing equipment. Doesn't matter if it is an old LBE, the suspenders, if it's an LBV, load-bearing vest, and it doesn't matter if it's some tactical vest from the civilian market or from another country, or even some type of MOLLE vest and MOLLE equipment. Make sure you have a basic standard of what each set is supposed to have, and each set should be able to carry a minimum of 200 rounds of ammunition, either in magazines or separate, depending on the weapon system it's expected to support. It should also be able to carry that minimum of 2 quarts of water, which could be 2 single 1-quart canteens or a single 2-quart camelback attached to it, whatever you have, and a medical pouch. Why do I say medical pouch instead of IFAK? Let's be realistic. Farther into a war, you're probably not going to be able to buy IFAKs on the market. So your ghetto guerrilla IFAK might turn out to be just a pouch that has some basic first aid items shoved in it. Things like some type of dressing, some type of tourniquet material. You get the idea. Next up, sleep gear, because everyone's got to sleep sooner or later. What am I talking in this? I'm talking poncho liners, wool blankets, sleeping bags, sleeping mats. For sleeping bags, you want them to be as cold as, or support as cold as possible. remember that a rating on a sleeping bag, that is the lowest temperature in testing where a person could potentially sleep all the way through the night. Could they survive in it less than that? Yes, but they definitely are not going to get a full night's sleep. So try to get one that will work. There are plenty of civilian ones on the market that will work. Go off of what you can find, what you can afford. Garage sales are great for this stuff. Look for those garage sales. I did a video on that too. Looking for people that are getting rid of their old hunting gear, camping gear, airsoft, paintball gear. You can usually pick up some stuff there. Also, thrift stores are a great location to look for. And go through, whenever I find anything in a thrift store that could be potentially be passed out to someone, I usually snap it up. Whether it's socks, a pair of boots, a pair of camouflage pants, a mess kit, or utensils, whatever. After that, rain gear. Because it rains everywhere, even in the desert, believe it or not. It doesn't rain as much in the desert, but it does rain occasionally. So rain gear, we're talking a poncho, which is multi-purpose. You don't just use it for rain gear, you can use it for shelter. Also, rain suits, wet weather gear. Doesn't have to be military, can be civilian. Just make sure that it is a earth tone, color, or pattern that's not going to stand out in the particular environment you expect to be operating or having to survive in. After that, number 6, cold weather gear. If you're in the northern part of the U.S., you should have some spare stuff to hand out. Some type of jacket, spare hats, spare gloves, scarves, whatever you come up with a standard on that. And potentially some spare boots. They could be civilian snow boots, they could be military boots, hunting boots, something that will keep their feet from freezing. And I will throw in there thick wool socks. The very northern edge of the United States, if you're up along the Canadian border or you're up in Alaska, wool socks really need to be a mandatory thing in your packing list, at least 1 or 2 pairs for use during winter. Now, after your cold weather gear, shelter material. Poncho, tarp, stakes, 5/50 cord or cordage. Could be a shelter half, could be one of these fancy bivvy tents, or a civilian camping tent that is camouflaged in color or earth toned in color. This other stuff is priority over shelter. Why? Because you can improvise a shelter if you really need to, out in the woods or even in an urban environment. Hell, even a desert, you really could improvise a shelter by digging into a size of sand dune, but I don't recommend it because sooner or later the fucking thing will collapse on you, but without reinforcement. After shelter, uniforms, boots, socks, t-shirts, belts, you get the idea. Spare stuff to pass out because the person could show up and all they got is a pair of blue jeans and a t-shirt. Well, try to at least give them a pair of boots to replace those sandals on their feet or whatever the hell they got. After this, we get into the more expensive items, which you really get a hold of as you can afford them. Magazines and cleaning kits. Think of the standard issue weapons for your country, for your area. Get appropriate magazines if you can. And cleaning kits and cleaning supplies for those weapons. If you stockpile weapons, because I do know of units that do this, they get parts kits and they reassemble them to a military standard by accident because they forgot to put in those semi-auto only parts. Well, make sure that you get the appropriate cleaning kit for that weapon system. because a cleaning kit for an M16 won't necessarily work on an AK-47. Get some that are appropriate for each weapon. So if you have a bolt action that's 30 caliber, make sure you have a cleaning kit for a 30 caliber weapon, for a 30 caliber rifle, and you keep it with that weapon. Then, as I said, weapons. This is going to be real questionable here soon, because there is legislation that they're trying to push through now where they're going to backdoor universal background checks everywhere, that no one can sell a firearm without having an FFL. Doesn't matter who you're selling it to. But weapons, you're looking for long guns, rifles, shotguns. I really am not going to say pistols are mandatory. That's a personal choice. Knives, fixed blades should be a mandatory. Some type of bayonet or hunting knife per person, because that's not just a weapon, it's also a tool. And then the very, very bottom of the list is the more expensive thing, which I know people are going to flip the fuck out about. Body armor, helmets, vests, plate carriers. That should be last. Those last two items are going to be the most expensive ones you're going to have. Now you may notice there's some items I don't have on here. Items that get people really riled up in giant arguments online over. Things like radios, night vision, all the fancy gadgets. When it comes down to it, you really don't need it. And quite frankly, you're going to come across it when you do. You can do an ambush without having a radio. You just arrange signals amongst your people. Bird calls, flares, explosions, a particular weapon fire, whatever. There's always ways around not having communications, not having radios. Remember those little things called smoke signals? Yeah, it worked really good for the Indians, Native Americans centuries ago, as they were kicking the ass of the U.S. military, first in the forests and then across the plains. Or you could think of those tribesmen in the jungles of Asia, as you see in the movies, the stereotype drums. There's always ways to communicate without a radio. And believe it or not, you can see at night. Not as well as you see in the daytime, but there are techniques that you can still see things at night. We used to teach it in basic training, for God's sakes. Now, I will throw in here, while you get spare items, always remember, get as much ammunition for the weapons that you have or expect to get. Pick up an extra little brick or two whenever you need it. Get as much food as you can, storable long-term items, freeze-dried meals, rice, beans, the rice pouches from Minute Maid or whoever, Uncle Ben's, whatever stuff's out there. Stuff that can be stored long-term. You don't have to worry as much about temperature and stuff. Medical supplies of all types. Your Band-Aids through to large surgical dressings. Also suture kits. Medications, so like anti-diarrheals, anti-constipation. Pain meds. Also antihistamines, tablets for when people are having allergic reactions. Cold medicines. I know some people will be screaming about antibiotics and this and that and that. If you can fucking afford it, you can get it, go ahead. Not everyone can. I'm trying to give you a list of things here to have on hand. Not everyone has the same budget. Some people will be doing their shopping for most of this stuff at garage sales and at Walmart. Others are going to have a little bit more money. Maybe they can buy the stuff online. And some people are going to have way too goddamn much money that they can order it custom. Do the best you can as you're getting stuff to create complete sets so that you have enough gear for 5 or 10 people. And once you get enough for 10 people, well, work on gathering enough for another 5 more and another 5 more. Maybe go together as a group. Make it a group effort. Pool your cash. One person can afford a rucksack. One person can only afford the mess gear. You know, maybe someone can afford a sleeping bag. You get the idea. And you make complete sets. Those extra sets of gear, store them in the field. Well, what do you mean in the field? Where you anticipate operating. Maybe at a initial rally point location for issuing out to people that lose their shit on the way there or they weren't able to complete their issue. This stuff should be hidden and it should be protected from the elements. Moisture is not your friend when it comes to storing gear, especially cotton-based gear. Mildew is a bastard and it will rot through that stuff really quick and easy. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot Militia movements, always remember essayons.